You don't have a clarity problem. You have an overthinking problem. And the worst part is, overthinking feels productive while it's destroying your peace. It feels like you're being careful. It feels like you're being intelligent. It feels like you're trying to get it right. But in real life, it usually does the opposite. It keeps you stuck in conversations long after they've ended. It keeps you replaying decisions you already made. It keeps you second-guessing your instincts, doubting your next move, and exhausting yourself trying to think your way into certainty. You tell yourself, I just need a little more time, a little more understanding, a little more analysis. But that little more never ends. Because overthinking does not lead to peace. It leads to fragmentation. And if you've been on this monad realization series with me, then you already know where this is going. The deeper truth you're looking for is never found through mental noise. The monad is not reached by more mental movement. It is noticed when that movement stops pretending that it's the source of truth. So in this video, we're going to talk about why you keep overthinking everything, why it never actually gives you the clarity that you want, and what begins to open when you stop worshiping thought as if it were your savior. A lot of people think overthinking means they care deeply. Sometimes it does, but more often than not, overthinking is what happens when the mind cannot tolerate uncertainty. It doesn't know how to rest in the unknown, so it starts manufacturing control. It starts asking endless questions. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make the wrong choice? What if I ruin everything? And the mind sells this whole process to you as wisdom. But let's be honest. Most overthinking is not wisdom. It is fear moving in circles. It is the mind trying to secure an outcome before life has even unfolded. It is an attempt to escape discomfort by converting uncertainty into mental activity. That's why it never works. Because the kind of clarity you actually need does not come from spinning harder. It comes from seeing more directly. And this is where the monad matters. The monad is not another thought to think. It is not another concept to analyze. It points to the undivided reality beneath the mental splitting. Beneath all of the what-ifs, all of the inner arguments, all of the efforts to mentally dominate life, there is a quieter ground of being that does not need to obsess in order to know. Overthinking is what happens when you lose contact with that. So let's break this down clearly. Let's begin. The reason overthinking is so hard to let go of is because it gives you a false sense of safety. When you sit there analyzing every angle, it feels like you're preparing. It feels like you're protecting yourself. It feels like if you can just think long enough, you'll finally arrive at the perfect answer. But most of the time, you're not solving the problem. You're feeding the loop. The mind grabs a situation, pulls it apart, reassembles it, questions it again, and then starts the cycle all over. And every time it does this, it reinforces the belief that the answer is still somewhere inside the next thought. That's the trap. Because if the previous 50 thoughts didn't free you, the next 50 probably won't either. Overthinking is not movement toward resolution. It is often resistance to direct experience. You don't want to feel exposed, so you think. You don't want to feel uncertain, so you think. You don't want to feel grief, rejection, vulnerability, or lack of control, so you think. Thought becomes a shield, But a shield can also become a prison. And this matters spiritually too. In the context of the monad, overthinking is one of the clearest ways the mind keeps recreating separation. The reality pointed to by the monad is whole, direct, and immediate. Overthinking fractures that immediacy into endless mental pieces. It turns life into a puzzle that must be solved, instead of a reality that can be met. The more trapped you are in a compulsive thought, the more distant truth seems. Not because truth moved, but because your attention is locked on the spinning. That is why overthinking feels like searching while actually keeping you lost. Here's the brutal truth. The mind is not built to produce final certainty. It's built to compare, to predict, to imagine possibilities. That can be useful, but when you ask the mind to give you permanent certainty about life, relationships, or your future, you are asking it to do something it cannot do. So it compensates by generating more thought. That's why overthinkers are never done. Even when they get an answer, they question the answer. Even when they make a choice, they wonder if another one would have been better. Even when they get reassurance, relief lasts 5 minutes before the mind returns to another scenario. Because the issue was never lack of thought. The issue was the belief that thought could deliver a kind of security it was never capable of giving. This is one of the deepest reasons overthinking never works. It cannot produce peace because peace is not the product of endless mental comparison. Peace begins when you stop asking thought to carry a weight it cannot carry. And again, this is where the monad gives us a deeper pointer. The monad is prior to all mental division. Before the mind says this or that, good or bad, safe or unsafe, there is the simple fact of being itself. The mind operates through fragmentation. The monad points beyond fragmentation. So when you're overthinking, you are not moving closer to the deepest truth of your situation. Very often, you are moving deeper into the mechanism that obscures it. This doesn't mean thought is evil. It just means thought has limits. And your suffering gets worse every time you demand the limitless from something that is limited. This is not just some abstract spiritual issue. This shows up everywhere. It shows up when someone texts you differently than usual, and you spend the next 6 hours trying to decode their tone. It shows up when you have to make a decision, and instead of choosing, you open 20 tabs in your mind and call it being responsible. It shows up when you replay an argument after it's over, crafting better comebacks in the shower like that somehow changes what happened. It shows up when you feel a strong inner knowing, but then immediately doubt it because it doesn't come with a spreadsheet and a guarantee. It shows up in relationships, where overthinking makes you less present, less open, less natural, because your attention is not actually with the person. It's trapped in your own mental surveillance system. It shows up in work, where you hesitate so long trying to avoid mistakes that you create a bigger mistake. Paralysis. It even shows up in healing, where you keep trying to understand yourself instead of actually sitting with yourself. And it shows up in spirituality. You hear truth. You feel something real. You sense there is something deeper than thought. Then immediately the mind tries to grab it, define it, compare it, master it, and turn it into a concept. That is exactly how living truth becomes dead philosophy. The monad is not meant to become another object of overthinking. It is meant to expose the futility of trying to mentally capture what can only be directly recognized. So if you've been overthinking your path, your worth, your relationships, or your spiritual life, understand this clearly. The habit is not helping you get closer to reality. It is often helping you to avoid the direct contact that reality requires. And that direct contact is where transformation begins. This is the part people don't always want to hear. A lot of overthinking is not about confusion. It's about distrust. You don't trust in what you felt. You don't trust in what you saw. You don't trust the quiet knowing that came before the mental storm. So instead of honoring direct seeing, you run back to analysis. But why? Because analysis feels more defendable. If you can explain your choice, justify your hesitation, and account for every possible outcome, then you feel less exposed. You feel like you have something solid to stand on. But some of the most important things in life do not arrive through that kind of process. Like when you know the room feels off before you can explain why. Or you know someone that is not being real before you can prove it. Or you know when a path is dead, even before all the evidence is in. That kind of knowing is quieter than thought, but often more true. Overthinking trains you to betray. It trains you to keep abandoning the thought for the explainable. And spiritually, this is one of the central issues. The monad is not recognized through defensive analysis. It is more like a direct, unmediated seeing. A recognition that reality is not fundamentally divided the way thought presents it. But if you are addicted to over-explaining everything, then you remain loyal to division. You remain loyal to mental distance. You remain loyal to the interpreter instead of the truth itself. That's why some people can talk about spiritual truth for years and still never rest in it. The mind keeps stepping in to own the experience. And overthinking is often the mind's way of staying in charge. So part of this path is learning how to let seeing be enough. Not careless impulsiveness, not delusion, but direct contact. The kind that doesn't need 20 layers of mental commentary in order to be real. So what actually helps? Not forcing yourself to stop thinking in some aggressive way. That usually just becomes more mental struggle. What helps is seeing thought for what it is, and no longer giving it absolute authority. You begin to notice when thinking is practical and when it's compulsive. You begin to notice when reflection becomes rumination. You begin to notice when your mind is genuinely solving something and when it's just afraid to let go. That noticing changes everything. Because once you see the loop as a loop, it starts to lose power. And then a different kind of clarity becomes available. Not the dramatic certainty the mind promised. Not a fantasy where every doubt disappears forever, but a quieter, steadier clarity. The kind that comes when you stop interfering so much. When you stop mentally chasing relief. When you become willing to be here before you demand answers. This is far closer to the spirit of real contemplation. And this is far closer to the doorway the monad points toward. Because the monad is not found through mental conquest. It is not the final result of perfect thinking. It is what remains when the addiction to fragmentation softens. It is the simple, unbroken fact of being before thought turns life into pieces. So when overthinking starts, the real work is not to think better forever. The real work is to notice. What am I trying not to feel? What am I trying to control? What uncertainty am I refusing to stand in? And what happens if I stop treating thought like it's the highest authority in my life? That's where the shift begins. Not in more noise, but in less interference. Not in mastering every possibility, but in becoming present enough to meet reality directly. That's where clarity lives. Overthinking doesn't fail because you haven't done it well enough. It fails because it cannot give you what you're asking from it. It cannot turn uncertainty into total control. It cannot think your way into perfect peace. It cannot replace direct contact with life. At best, thought can be a tool. At worst, it becomes a maze. And many people live inside that maze for years, believing they are moving forward simply because their mind is busy. But busy is not clear. Busy is not free. Busy is not awake. The deeper shift is realizing that truth is often much simpler than the mind allows. Not always easy, but simple, immediate, and present. Already here before the commentary begins. That's why overthinking never works. Because what you need most is rarely more mental movement. You need honesty. You need presence. You need the courage to stop circling and actually look. And within this Monad Realization series, this matters deeply. Because the monad is not something your overthinking mind will finally solve one day. It is what quietly shines beneath the whole performance, beneath the effort, beneath the analysis, beneath the search. The mind keeps saying, think more. Truth keeps saying, be here. And one of those voices leads to exhaustion. The other leads home. If this journey spoke to you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone ready to experience life beyond thought. Comment below. When do you overthink the most? Relationships, decisions, your future, or your spiritual path? I read every comment. If you would like to support my work directly, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/magnumopus333. Or you can explore some original merchandise at my Teespring store online. The link is in the description below. Remember, your consciousness is the key that unlocks reality. Let's keep unlocking it. Together. Thank you for watching. Until next time.